Shalom, everyone, and welcome to our third Root Source Annual Foundation Symposium. My name is Gidon Ariel. I'm the CEO of Root Source and your co-host, along with Dr. Victoria Sarvati.
Shalom, everyone, and Hanukkah Sameach.
We're very excited about another landmark event co-hosted by Israelis, the Israelis headquartered Root Source, an organization dedicated to promoting respectful relationships between pro-Israel Christians and Jews. And the Nathaniel Foundation, which is a philanthropic organization that supports Christian and Jewish ministry projects, as well as humanitarian and educational opportunities in the United States, Israel, and other nations.
Indeed, Ginto, we are really honored to partner with Root Source again. And this time it's about Hanukkah and the dedication of the temple and all the wonderful, beautiful stories of the victory of the Maccabees. And so we are now going straight from the New Testament, I think, today, when Jesus actually was in the temple. So this is another little angle that we're actually going to be talking about tonight. So anyway, hello, everyone. I'm Victoria Sarvati. I'm the co-founder, along with my husband, Paul, of the Nathaniel Foundation. And today we have 3 seasoned Torah teachers and our rabbis representing the Root Source end from the land of Israel. And from this side of the pond, we have 3 Hebraic Christian Zionist scholars, all with doctorates in their fields.
That is extremely impressive, Victoria. And I feel that our annual symposium is becoming an epic event. So before we get started, I want to remind everybody that this is a friendly meeting, not intended to be a debate, of course, or an opportunity to proselytize, but rather a platform where we can share and learn more about each other's points of view.
Yes, and Gadon, you and I both have been in several different symposia now, which have resulted in some very healthy respect for one another. And we have found cohesiveness and understanding, and we now share a growing friendship based on this trust and this deference.
And respect. Baruch Hashem.
Yes.
I very much agree. Regarding today's event, here's what we can expect. Each of our scholars will make a short talk, about 18 to 20 minutes each. Following each presentation, Victoria or I will ask a single question if we have one. And the speaker will answer it very quickly, so we won't be going too much over time. Following all presentations, if we do have enough time, we will host a short panel with the speakers. But before we begin today's proceedings, I would like to take this opportunity to officially launch the publication of the proceedings of last year's symposium. So if you will bear with me for a moment, I will share the screen. And here we aren't. And here we are. Let me close up a few of these things here. And so you can see, this is the book that we published from last year's symposium. The symposium was titled "The Torah Just for Jews or Also for All." It was the Nathaniel Foundation Root Source Symposium in Shavuot 2022, a joint project of Root Source and the Nathaniel Foundation. And some of the speakers there, while this is, here we are, loaded pretty quickly, were Dr. Rivka Lambert Adler, Dr. Richard Booker, Rabbi Elon Adler, Dr. Brad Young, Dr. Ann Levin, and Dr. John Gar, who we will be hearing from today as well. I do believe he's going to be batting cleanup today as well. This, of course, followed our symposium of 2021, Jews, Christians, and Passover, an Abyss or a Bridge. So last year's symposium, which we have now published as a book. We encourage you all to check it out on Root Source, root-source.com. Go to store and search for Symposium, and you'll be able to see that book. But today, instead of the Shavuot Symposium, we will be jumping right in to our Hanukkah Symposium, which is not very surprising as today is Hanukkah. It is about 6:05 p.m. here in Israel, and I just finished lighting my Hanukkah candles with my family. And we are now going to jump right in to the symposium. Before we do that, another introduction. I would like to point out that we are being hosted today on the Give Butter platform, which is a modern event and fundraising platform. We're very grateful to all of our contributors today to Root Source. Of course, first and foremost, today's event sponsor, the Nathaniel Foundation. Please consider making another donation to bring us over our new goal of $15,000. If you are watching this broadcast live on givebutter.com/Hanukkah 2023, then you can just click on tickets/donate in the upper right-hand corner, at least on my computer. Perhaps it appears elsewhere if you're watching this on your phone, and you'll be able to see the place where you can click right away. Okay, so I'm handing it over to you now, Bivakasha, Victoria.
Okay, my friend. Now, with all that being said, let's not waste any more time. Our first speaker today is David Ha'ivri. Did I say it right?
I think so.
The Hebrew, right? Ha'ivri?
Ha'ivri, the Hebrew, that's right.
Okay, I know a little bit of Hebrew. David is a passionate Israel tour guide and scholar. He is an elected councilman on the Shomron Regional Municipal Council and serves as deputy chairman under Yossi Dagan, as well as the head of the committee for commemorating the memory of fallen soldiers and terror victims. He is a teacher at Root Source and a faculty member at the International Center for Public Diplomacy, Israel. His topic today is Hanukkah and the Land of Israel. David, it is certainly a pleasure to meet you, and please take the floor.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, and thank you all for inviting me to participate in this wonderful event in honor of Hanukkah and Jewish-Christian relations, and studying together the Jewish sources. My presentation today, I shortly will be sharing a presentation board. It has to do with the geography, placing the events of Hanukkah on the map and on the timeline. Not only for people in this generation, but throughout the generations from the time of the Bible and on. It has been challenging for lovers of the Bible to put their feet on the ground, to place the Bible on the ground, and to realize that the scripture that we read is not taking place in some imaginary platform. It's not a fable or a made-up story, but is actually events that occurred and shaped the course of history and the course of faith. The events of Hanukkah are no different. And well, let's dive right in. Just a second, I will share. Here we go. Okay, do you see my screen?
Yes, we do. Beautiful.
All right, fantastic. So my question is, where did the events of the Hanukkah take place geographically on the map? And we are going to take a look at some of those events. Second, I'm trying to move the yeah. Okay. Bringing the Bible down to earth. As I mentioned earlier, there have been many scholars throughout history who have spearheaded reconnecting the lovers of the Bible and faith to the land of Israel, where these events actually took place. there were certain periods throughout history where access to these places was very difficult for Jewish people, at times for Christian people, and at times the land was desolate, the roads were very difficult. There's a famous event with Rabbi Nachman of Breslev, who came to the land of Israel at the end of the 18th century, and was one of those people who relit the quest of people to actually walk in the path of the Bible. Let's take a look at the book of Maccabee, or the events that we learn about in the book of Maccabee. But we will start with the prayers that the Jewish people say throughout the 8 days of Hanukkah. It's called Al Hanisim. It's a special prayer that we add on to our 3 daily prayers. Jewish people pray morning, shacharit, mincha in the afternoon, and arvit in the evening. And this special prayer is also added to Birkat HaMazon, the prayers that we say after our meals. It's called Al Hanisim, thanks for the miracles. And I have translated the blessing and presented it here before us. We are saying, and for the miracles and deliverance, and for the heroism and for the salvation, and for the wars that you, this is Hashem, God, did for our ancestors in those days at this time. We see these miracles as ongoing, not only events that occurred a very long time ago. And in the process of this talk, we will put our finger on when that long time ago was. But we see this as ongoing. And in the days of Matityahu, the son of Yochanan Hashmonai, and his sons, when the evil Greek Hellenist Empire was upon your people Israel, to make them forget your Torah and transgress the laws of your will. And you, in your great mercy, stood up for them. In their time of trouble, you fought their battles. You condemned the wicked. You avenged their vengeance. You delivered the mighty into the hands of the weak, and the many into the hands of the few. The impure into the hands of the pure, and the wicked into the hands of the righteous. The sinners into the hands of those who practice your Torah. And you have made a great and holy name for yourself in your world. And for your people Israel, you have made a great day. After that, your sons came to restore your house and empty your hall of the impurity and cleanse your temple and light the candles in the holy courtyard and set those 8 days of Hanukkah for thank and praise to your great name. This is the blessing that the Jewish people recite 3 times a day in our morning, afternoon, and evening prayers, and in our Birkat HaMazon, the blessing over the meals throughout the 8 days of Hanukkah. And here we see some of the very well-known, the most famous, icons of the holiday of Hanukkah, the lighting of the candles. Our menorah, or the Chanukiah, as we say in Hebrew, which reminds us of the menorah that stood in the Beit HaMikdash, in the temple in Jerusalem. Of course, the menorah that stood in the temple had 7 branches, and our Chanukiah, which we light for the holiday of Hanukkah, has 9 branches. But the 9 branches that we light throughout Hanukkah are to publicize the greatness of the miracle that the Maccabim, the Hashmonaim, the sons of Matityahu, were victorious in the war against the Hellenists, and who tried to stop the Jewish people from observing the laws of the Torah, and who desolated the temple in Jerusalem. if we notice within the text here, it says, and after that, after what? Your sons came to restore your house. In a more simplistic understanding or view of the holiday of Hanukkah, we focus mostly on lighting the candles, and we hear the stories of the great miracle of the oil that was found, the pure oil that the Hashmonaim found when they liberated the temple and were able to clean the temple and relight the candles. The story goes that they found only one small jar of pure oil that would have lasted for only one day, and there was a miracle that small amount of pure oil lasted for 8 days. So to commemorate that miracle, we light the candles for 8 days. But actually, that part of the story of Hanukkah, particularly, is not actually recorded in the history of the miracles of Hanukkah, the great miracles that we are commemorating. The after that, what happened before that, those are the great miracles that we are actually commemorating, and those are the wars of the Maccabim against the Hellenists, the wars where the mighty fell at the hands of the weak, and the many fell at the hands of the few. The weak and the few were the Maccabim. And here, showing a map that Gidon actually mentioned to me when he asked me to prepare the talk. He said, you remember that map that we've seen that shows where the battles of the Maccabim took place? This is a pop-up map that kind of shows the topographic of the land of Israel, and it's positioned facing east rather than the top facing north, as we're used to seeing maps. So the blue on the bottom left hand is the Mediterranean Sea, and we can see along the coastline names of modern cities that we are familiar with today: Haifa, Hedera, Nathaniel, Tel Aviv, Ashdod, Ashkelon. And we can see that the west side of the land of Israel is lower ground, and then this area in the middle represents the hills of the Samaria and the hills of Judea. And if we notice the numbers that signify the wars of the Maccabim, they all took place in the area that today is known as the West Bank / Judea and Samaria. I'll show you another map that might make it a little easier to connect. Here we see a regular map that we're used to seeing with the top of the map facing north. And we can see Israel and the areas of Judea and Samaria that are also known as the West Bank. And I've added these arrows to point out some of the battles of the Maccabim that took place leading up to the liberation of the Temple Mount. There were actually 4 battles that took place before Jerusalem was liberated, before the Temple Mount was liberated. That's what we are speaking about in the prayer when we say, and after that, what happened before that. Here we have battle number 1 at Apollonius, which today is in the area of Ma'ale Levuna in the Samaria, and battle number 2 at the hills of Gofna, which is in the area of Beit El today, and battle number 3 that took place at Baal Chatzor, which is near Ofra today, and battle number 4 in Givon Valley, which too is in north of Jerusalem, today in the Benjamin area. And only in battle number 5 were the Maccabim, the sons of Matityahu, successful in liberating Jerusalem and cleansing the Temple Mount and removing the altar that had been defied by placing idolatry on it and building a new one and lighting the candles of the menorah. Battle number 6 was at Beit Zechariah. Beit Zechariah is in Judea, south of Jerusalem. Today, there is an Israeli town there called Elazar. The town Elazar, which is just west of the Israeli town Efrat, which is much larger and might be more well known. Elazar is actually named for the battle that took place there by the Hashmonaim, by the sons of Matityahu. One of the brothers of Yehuda HaMaccabi, whose name was Elazar, died in that battle. I lost my screen. Sorry. Did you lose my screen?
I see it just fine.
Are you seeing the same screen?
I'm seeing the map of visual screen with those 6 arrows.
Okay. Something funny is happening here, and it's showing me a different screen. All right, I am back with you. Thank you, 6 arrows. Beit Zechariah, Elazar. Elazar was the brother of Yehuda Maccabi, and we learn that he fell in that battle. He was killed in that battle. The Hellenist Greeks brought elephants as part of their war party. And the Judeans were unfamiliar with that type of warfare, fighting against elephants. And on top of the elephant, there was a type of a tower, and a general, the brother of Yehuda Maccabi, Elazar, mistakenly thought that the general, the commander of the Hellenist force, was riding on that elephant. And he believed that if he could take down the elephant, the commander too would die. And he ran under the elephant and stabbed it with his spear. And the elephant collapsed on him, and he died at that place. That was Elazar, the brother of Yehuda Maccabi. Okay, here we go. So, trying to connect not only the land, but also the timeline. When did these events take place? Who were the main players in these events? Are there historical figures who, aside from Yehuda HaMaccabi, who might be more well known, are there other historical figures who influenced the events that led to what occurred here? That if we know who they are, would that help us place these events historically? And what are our sources? So when did this happen? It took place about 2,200 years ago. And it followed, how did this come about? How did the Greek Hellenist influence occur here in the land of Judea? Are you familiar with Alexander the Great? Alexander the Great captured the known world in his time, established the Greek Empire. He captured Egypt and Judea in the year 332 BCE. Second. Here we can see Alexander the Great captures Egypt and Judea in 332. And then shortly after that, within 10 years, Alexander the Great died. And his land, his empire, was inherited by 4 of his main generals. Each one took a portion. And from that time on, there was competition between the southern Hellenist kingdom and the northern Hellenist kingdom. Okay. I had a map showing that as well. I think that I lost that somewhere in the preparations. I'm sorry. But in any case, they were competing, and they took over the land of Judea and decided to force the Judeans to adopt their culture and religion, and saw the Jewish faith as a threat to their integration into the Hellenist rule. And at some point, they were, as we know in the story, they were forbidding the Jews to conduct the ceremonies of the temple in Jerusalem. And they wanted the Jews to sacrifice pigs in honor of the emperor. And many of the Jews were playing in, didn't see that as much harm. But when they came to the city of Modi'im, which is just north of Jerusalem, and they called on the Jews to sacrifice a pig in honor of the emperor, a Jewish man, a Kohen, a priest from the priestly family, he was an old man, his name was Matityahu, could not accept the situation. And he jumped up onto the altar and he slaughtered the Jew who was willing to slaughter the pig, to sacrifice the pig. And he also slaughtered the Greek representative. And that was the declaring of war. And then he shouted out to the Jews, he said, Mi Lashem Elai. Those who are with Hashem should follow me. And they fled to the mountains, following Matityahu. That was the beginning of the revolt against the Greeks. And from that point on, he appointed his son, Yehuda, to be the commander. Now, coming back to the geographical event of these wars, I wanted to tell you about one of the battles of Yehuda Maccabi. They were all amazing strategic accomplishments. It is considered, the battles of Yehuda Maccabi are considered to be a breaking point for guerrilla warfare, whereas the Greeks were fighting in a very organized fashion, and they were the mighty, they were the trained soldiers. The Judean soldiers were farmers, scholars, workmen. They weren't an organized fighting force, and they were much smaller, but they had the advantage of knowing the terrain, of being locals. And here, the Battle of Emmaus was one of the outstanding strategic accomplishments of Yehuda Maccabi. They were based, the Judean fighters of Yehuda Maccabi were based at a place called Mitzpah. Mitzpah is north of Jerusalem. Today, it is identified as Nebi Samuel. Nebi Samuel, the tomb of the prophet Samuel, which is north of Jerusalem, is considered to be Mitzpah. And it is a high point between coming up from the lowlands of the Sharon, of the shore area, and it overlooks the city of Jerusalem. It's a place of great strategic significance throughout history. There were some very challenging battles in Israel's War of Independence in 1948, and in the Six-Day War in 1967, when Israel actually succeeded in capturing the same place. In any case, the Greek armies were based at a place called Emmaus. Emmaus has a important significance for Christian scholars as well. as this is considered in the Christian tradition to be the first place that Yeshua revealed himself after the resurrection. The two men saw him at Emmaus, Nicopolis. But going back to Yehuda Maccabi, Emmaus was the main base of the Greek forces. And Yehuda Maccabi, through his intelligence, learned that the Greek forces were planning to raid the Judean base at Mitzpah. Yehuda Maccabi took his forces hiking throughout the night in an alternative path. And while the Greeks were making their way to Mitzpah, this is Mitzpah, the Judean camp, the Judeans had circled around the other way to the Greek main base. So the main base of the Greeks was almost empty. The Judeans succeeded in eliminating the Greek forces who were protecting their base, and they set the base on fire. The Greeks, in the meantime, reached the Judean base, and they found it empty. So they thought that the Jews had fled into the wilderness, and they started making their way back to Emmaus. But on their way back, they saw that their base was all smoke and fire, and the Judean forces were waiting for them and chased them all the way down towards Gaza. And it was a huge downfall for the Greek forces. My friends, I again want to thank you for this opportunity to address the conference. My greatest passion is to take people as a tour guide to actually visit these places. And I look forward to the opportunity to see you here, feet on the ground, and to actually visit the sites where the Bible and history took place.
Very good. Thank you, David. I was very intrigued about thinking about what your tours, your study tours must be like as you incorporate your knowledge of history and anthropology and geography and all of the wonderful insight that you gave today. I did not know about the 6 battles. I didn't know about the strategic warfare of the Maccabees and the Emmaus and Mitzpah situation back and forth. That was quite impressive. Thank you very much. I'd love to be on your study tour sometime. Do you go to places like Modi'in and Efrat and Emmaus and talk about these locations?
Yes, I do. And that is my greatest pleasure.
Right.
I would love to do that with you.
All right, hands-on, you get to actually see and hear and experience what they experience in a sense. But wow, bravo. Don, do you have a question for David?
I'm just looking at this map, which is the last slide of David's excellent presentation. And I was wondering, are you going to get to that last slide? I see 8 out of 9, and I'm so grateful.
That's the one you didn't.
Because I'm seeing the map of modern day Israel, or just around Jerusalem, and it is actually the map of the history of the Maccabees. So that is what is so amazing about Israel today, and that's something that I'm sure that David emphasizes so much in his tours, that when you go to Israel today, you are actually visiting history. And when you study Jewish history, you are actually visiting modern Israel. So it all comes together. And thank you very, very much for sharing that with us, David.
Thank you. Chag Sameach.
Okay, I'll take away your screen share over here, and hopefully I'll be able to stop sharing my screen quickly too. Excellent. So we are now ready for, please stick around, David, if you can, and maybe some of the people who will be here will have more questions for you. Let us move forward to our next speaker. I do believe everyone is here. Our next speaker is Dr. Susanna Kokkonen. Dr. Kokkonen is a speaker and author of several books on the Holocaust and anti-Semitism. Until recently, Dr. Kokkonen was the director of the Christian Friends of Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, Israel. She is working today as a consultant for the Holocaust Garden of Hope, a new memorial to be built in Kingston, Texas. And she's also teaching in Helsinki, Finland, as well as online globally. Dr. Kokkonen frequently contributes to TV and radio programs, as well as publications around the world. And today we will be hearing from Dr. Kokkonen speaking on the topic of light and oil, a messianic miracle. Dr. Kokkonen, I hope you can hear us, and I hope that we'll be able to hear you as well. Bevakasha.
Thank you so much. And now if you have your Bible, now would be a good time to pick it up, because I'm actually doing this. I'm taking everything from the Bible. And many of us might think, well, going back to creation is going too far. It has nothing to do with Hanukkah. But I'm actually going to go to talk about light. And light begins at the story of creation. And this is extremely current, because when I see the world, when you see the world around us today, it's very dark. And based on the Bible, darkness preceded light. But light was the first thing that God created. And why did he do that? What did God do in the creation story? He separated elements that don't belong together. So light and darkness were separated. Night and day were separated. And when we look at that light, even in terms of many cultures all over the world, we can see that light is always considered not just a spiritual thing, but also a source of understanding. So light is good in every culture, almost all over the world. And darkness, once God had separated those elements, darkness had to give way to light. And God saw the light, that it was good, Genesis 1:4. So what is light? Light actually also functions as a cover. Psalm 104:2, the Lord wraps himself in light. And when he wraps himself in light, so light is like a garment to him, darkness has to flee. Psalm 36:9, in your light we see light, which again, God's light, it gives us understanding. I believe that refers to wisdom, but that refers also to a spiritual understanding. Now, in the New Testament, 1 John 1:5, God is light. In him there is no darkness at all. So God is the source of light, but when he created that light, when he created the light that separated us from the darkness, he also created other lights. And in the older versions of the Bible in English, they are called luminaries. So he created luminaries to separate between day and night and to be signs for appointed times. So everybody knows, if you are familiar with the Hebrew Bible, you know that the calendar, God's calendar, is actually an agricultural calendar, and it's based on what happens in the land of Israel. But when we talk about Moed, this as like a set time, it's not just an agricultural moment, but a set time. I believe that it's a time when something has to happen that could not have happened before. And if you go to Psalm 102:13, actually the word that is used there in Hebrew is et. So it's a different word for time, but it says the time to favor her. Yeah, the set time has come, and favor who? Favor Zion. And of course, when these things happen, when it's God's set time for something to happen in Israel or in the midst of the Jewish people, that is going to have an impact on the nations. So throughout the Bible, you will be able to see actually how the Jewish history, all the historic events that happen, most of the time they have a connection to other nations. And the nations, they act in different ways towards the Jewish people, and God judges them based on that behavior. So that light, God's light, we have that physical light, we have the stars, we have the moon, we have the sun. But I think I'm talking about something that is a little more mystical, about God's light that is an illuminary that shows us when a set time for something has come. And I want to point out that in the temple, the menorah, it was very detailed and it had to be done exactly according to God's instructions. And everybody knows pure gold, pure oil, 7 lamps. But think about that light, that who had to see that light? Because it would be natural for us to think that that menorah existed, so it would be light inside the temple. But actually, it was meant to illuminate to outside. Why? Because other people, nations, had to see that God was dwelling in the midst of Israel. And you know, when I'm saying this, I almost feel cold shivers because I'm thinking about what is happening now in the land of Israel. And I'm thinking about this sentence that I want to repeat. Nations had to see that God was dwelling in the midst of Israel. Wow. That's really amazing that menorah, that amazing menorah that had to build so exactly, it was actually built so that God's presence would be shown to the outside. And how is oil connected to this? Because it's light and oil, that was the topic. So first of all, what is the task of the oil in the Bible? To set apart. The oil sets apart. First, priests, then kings, but also articles, things that were used in the tabernacle. They were anointed with that holy oil that had to be so pure. But there is only one who is the anointed one. There were many people who were anointed with the oil, but there is only one who is the anointed one, and that is the Mashiach. There's only one who is the anointed one, because that is the meaning of that word. In English, when we talk about Messiah, we might not even understand what is really the meaning of that word, but the meaning of that word is the anointed one. And now I want to, for a moment, if you open Luke 4 from the New Testament, you will see that according to Luke, Jesus had a very specific Parashat HaShavua, you know, the Bible verses that were read during a certain Sabbath. According to Luke 4, this was the first sermon that he was doing, and it's from Isaiah 61. Now, Isaiah is a very special prophet, because if you look at Isaiah, you find that he talks about two things. I don't believe I'm alone in this interpretation, but he speaks about the Messiah and he speaks about Israel. Like there's a destiny of Israel that he speaks about, but he also speaks about the Messiah. And Isaiah 61, I'm going to read to you in Hebrew just a few words from the beginning. Ruach Adonai alai, yan mashach Adonai oti levaser anavim. And it says that the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. The Lord anointed me. And that was the first text, according to Luke, that he was preaching about. And I think that's really remarkable, because it says that he was, you know, God anointed me. That's what he was saying. And then, of course, the verse that was chosen for this conference, John 10:22, you know, because Hanukkah, for most Christians, when they read that, and it says the Feast of Dedication, they don't know that we are talking about Hanukkah, because I talked about it with so many Christians in so many churches. I'm sure all of our speakers know this, that people just don't connect. They just go right past it. They don't understand that it's really important that Jesus went up to the temple, and it says that it was winter. and so on. Now, why is that so important for us Christians, especially if you are less familiar with these things that connect Jews and Christians? You have to understand that Jesus' life centered around Second Temple Judaism. His spiritual home, but also his physical life, was centered around the temple in Jerusalem, and that was Second Temple Judaism. And for us to understand what Jesus was about, why did he reveal himself during Hanukkah, which is a cultural festival, you could say? It's not one of the biblically commanded festivals from the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible. I think that shows that his life centered around his Jewish identity, and he was where his people were. So now you might think, well, what connects this light and oil? Like, why to talk about these two together? So light, I said that God wraps himself in it, and that's kind of like a garment for God, and then the darkness has to hide. So light is an element that reveals. It shows, everybody knows how light shows things that we don't want to see, whether it's physical or spiritual. But also, light can also hide. So I am going to do something that you can, I believe, only do in the Hebrew language, and I hope that this will go okay. But we have the word shemen in Hebrew. So we have three letters. We have the shin, mem, and nun in that word. And in the Hebrew language, it's possible that you pick these letters and then you try to understand what is the meaning of that word. Like, how could you, if you took each letter and you gave them a meaning, like what could you do? So I'm going to give two very interesting words, sentences that we could make from the word shemen. So shin, mem, nun. Now we think, well, what could this be? So first of all, I wrote it down here in Hebrew. Shem Mashiach Nistar. The name of the Messiah is hidden. And this word nistar, it's really important because it's actually only one time in the Bible where it talks about God's secrets, and it uses word nistarot. So nistar, it's also secret in that context. But the other one that could also be, and I believe that both of these are right, and I feel very, this is very, very mystical, like something that I think only works in Hebrew. Shem Mashiach Nigaleh. The name of the Messiah is revealed or is found out. And that is, to me, Hanukkah. We think about it as it's about gifts, giving gifts. It's about light and, of course, about oil. But I think that it's much deeper than that. And I felt about it very strongly now during this war that is going on in Gaza, that it's about an eternal struggle between light and darkness. And that struggle is very much related to God, who God is and how he reveals himself. But it's also related to everything that Jesus spoke. And to us Christians, we have to understand this, that this is not just Jewish history. This is not just something that the Jews observed, but if Jesus went up to the temple and he observed this holiday, it means that it's very important to us. Now, I want to come to the Holocaust because that is really my specialty. And I want to say this, that during the Holocaust, it was very, very important, even when people were in impossible circumstances, that they would observe the holidays. And how could they observe them? Now think about it. Even when they were in the camps, where if you had a piece of bread, it could mean life or death. But there were people who on Yom Kippur, they didn't eat. They gave their bread to somebody else. That's how important it was. So as I was looking into tonight, I found this from the Lodz ghetto, and the Lodz ghetto in Poland, it was a very large ghetto, the second largest after the Warsaw ghetto. In Warsaw ghetto, over time you had 500,000 people, but Lodz ghetto was almost as large. And there in December 1943, so 1943, if you know about World War II, you know that already at that point, if you were observing what was happening at the war front, you already could have known that perhaps the Germans were going to lose the war. But the German actions against the Jews, they became much worse as the war was coming closer to its conclusion. That's also really important to know. So they were observing Hanukkah in the Lodz ghetto, and I looked at the testimonies. What did they say? And actually, people would not be able to have so many candles. They might just have one candle. So they might be able to just do one celebration of Hanukkah together, but they did it. And there was a man, a German Jew, his name was Oskar Singer, and he wrote a diary. So I will just read to you what he wrote. As he was leaving one of those Hanukkah ceremonies, he wrote, "The menorah candles go out. Darkness prevails once more. We go out into the street. Ghetto life starts again." And only 8 months later, in the summer of 1944, they were deported to Chelmno and Auschwitz. Both of those camps at that point in time were already extermination camps. So most of those people didn't survive. And that was so 1943, and now we are in 2023, and we are experiencing this struggle at this very time when we are celebrating Hanukkah. We are experiencing this struggle, and I see that many of these elements, what we are observing in the reactions of the people around us, actually they have to do with Hanukkah. They have to do with that story of the Maccabees. And this struggle until the Messiah comes, it's never ending. This struggle between darkness and light. And now, usually I don't do this, but during this war, I started having like all these poems, like these thoughts that would just come to me. So I want to end, and this is really very special that I'm willing to share this personal poem from my notebook with you, but it's about light. I long for light. This night is waiting for the morning, like the winter waits for the summer, like the stars wait for the moon. This light is too dark. I am waiting. Where is he who said, "Let there be light"? And there was light. But this night is too dark. This night is never ending, but light was there always. Almost since the creation, night has been too dark. Yet light always is. In his presence, I long for light. Thank you.
Oh, Susanna, that was unbelievable. Thank you so much. I felt your passion. I hope I can talk. Beautiful. You did such a wonderful job of taking something very mystical at the soul level, a very deep level, and you actually illuminated it by the help of the Holy Spirit today to us. And wow.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh, that was just beautiful.
Thank you.
One thing I kind of thought of whenever you talked about how he had the luminaries, I would assume you're talking about the sun, the moon, the stars, and
yeah,
cosmos. And we have this saying, the stars lined up, because something happened, something at a point in time, a set time happened, and we talk about sort of in a, like a parable, or it's a little saying, well, the stars are lining up for me. But that is really true, isn't it? I mean, I feel
yes, absolutely. I never thought about that, but I heard that saying. Yes.
Thank you very much. Gidon, do you have a comment or a question for?
Just when you were talking about the luminaries lining up, I thought of the weekly portion. Right now we are reading the story of Joseph and his brothers. And the beginning of that story is where Joseph tells his brothers about two of his dreams. One, when the wheat, or barley or something like that is getting together and bowing down towards Joseph's wheat. And the other is that the moon and the stars and the sun are bowing down to Joseph. And I think that is something that I never thought of. That and thank you very much, Susanna, that you brought it out to the fore. That Hanukkah, the Feast of Dedication, is also colloquially and popularly known as the Festival of Lights. So you're connecting it again to the beginning of Genesis, the beginning of the Bible. Really, even though Hanukkah is the last holiday, it's even after the last holiday of the Bible. Yes. But it is connected to the beginning of the Bible with the light. And this very important story that always falls out in according to the modern Hebrew calendar, the Jewish calendar, always the story of Joseph we read during Hanukkah. So usually we read
I didn't know that. That is so amazing. I'm amazed. Yes. I didn't
absolutely.
Realize or think about it.
So it's really interesting that it's not only Joseph and the brothers, and there's a million things that we could talk about, but I never thought that dream is not only as it is in the simple reading of the text, the connecting of the family of Joseph and bowing down to him, which ultimately happened, which is the simple version of that story. If a gun appears in the first act, it's going to shoot in the last act. So that is what the Bible did for us. It prepared the bowing down in the beginning, and at the end, the family of Joseph bowed down to him. But the specific of that dream of the lights connects also to the holiday of Hanukkah. So thank you very, very much for that fascinating connection.
Eye-opening, really eye-opening. Thank you, Susanna.
Thank you.
Well, next we have Abe Truitt. And Abe, you are an up-and-coming scholar. So glad to see that we've got another generation coming behind us. We were wondering where you guys were. So we're so glad that you're here. 31 years old. He's fluent in 2 languages. And he serves as the English coordinator for Benyadenu, returning to the Temple Mount, and CEO of TrueSight, a 3D platform dedicated to bringing Israel into the homes of people around the world. This is how tiny my letters are. This is how big the type it was that our Gidon sent me. Thank you. I couldn't, as a PDF, I couldn't get it bigger. So I apologize for having to struggle that. But anyway, Abe, we are looking so forward to what you have to say. Go ahead. You got the floor.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome. I want to point out also in this symposium that Gidon is a magician now for 2 reasons that I found so far. The first is that it's exactly 7 o'clock, and I'm actually speaking exactly at 7 o'clock, which means we're on time, which means that something must be wrong because, we have kids at home. We know that you have to add at least 15 minutes per child, per person, per symposium event. But it's amazing that we're both sticking to the time frame here, and we have such incredible things to share. And I will try to also keep it within my time frame. I hope you don't hear my daughter, who is resisting with all of her heart and all of her soul, going to bed. The second reason why Gidon is a magician is because it's like all of my ducks are already in a row. The wonderful speech that we had from David Ivri gives us the background of the land of Israel, which I've heard many Christians call the fifth gospel, a real explanation of what the land truly looks like, what the geography really looks like, and how it illustrates the Bible in certain ways. When you're speaking from a hilltop, when you're standing over a valley where something specific happened, or you're adjacent to some place where something happened, it oftentimes can illuminate incredible things about the Bible. The best example that I always give of this, just to show people why you should come to the land of Israel, why you should see the land of Israel in some meaningful way, is the story of the binding of Isaac. Abraham comes from Hebron, comes from the south area of Israel. Hebron Street is just 2 blocks this way for me in Jerusalem. Um, he walks down that ancient pathway and he reaches the first hilltop there. The first hilltop that you see the the Mount Moriah on is the hilltop that's just up the street for me. And that's a place where you can literally see Abraham standing there with Isaac. And you think about the pathway that Abraham takes. He doesn't go around the mountains to get to the Mount Moriah. If anyone can picture this, who's been to Jerusalem before, rather he goes down into a valley. That valley has a very specific purpose, and that purpose was for the purpose of child sacrifice. That was the valley of the child sacrifice to the servants of Baal. So you can suddenly see the words of the Bible being given such a different light as Abraham takes his one and only beloved son into the valley of child sacrifice, into the valley of Baal, only to climb out of that valley to Mount Moriah, to then end that notion, that end of that concept that our God is not a bloodthirsty God that demands the sacrifice of children to please him, and essentially commits this act that we know about in our scriptures today. Um, for that, that's a good enough reason to come to Israel just to see that one specific site and feel that feeling that I had the pleasure of feeling. And being named Abe, Abraham is of course my the person that I'm named after. What I want to share with you today is a little geography, a little bit of that light as well, and that's why I also was mentioning that Gideon is a magician by putting Suzanne just before me because she's speaking about the power and importance of that light that we're speaking about during Hanukkah, and that light essentially being of such incredible quality and of such incredible holiness. And so I'm going to speak to you a little bit about the importance of that light, and I'm going to do so by peeling back a couple of layers and then reaching my conclusion at the end. So bear with me and hold on tight. So I'd first like to talk about myself. I'm Jewish, born and raised. I've been an Orthodox Jew for the past 32 years practicing. My father converted to Judaism. He was a Methodist Christian and came from a Methodist Christian family all the way back, immigrated to the United States back in the 1600s. And on my mother's side are Levites going all the way back to the times of the Levites, of course. And I only really recognized this joint heritage that I had of Christianity and Judaism when I met evangelical Christians for the first time in the land of Israel. And I was with them on their journey trying to figure out, what are you guys doing here? I couldn't quite figure it out. I couldn't figure out what do Christians see in all this stuff? Like, I know what I see. I was raised to pray to Zion 3 times a day, 4 times a day on certain holidays. I would, say rebuilding of Jerusalem speedily in our days every time we ate bread. Like I would essentially talk about the nation of Israel, the land of Israel, being part and parcel with my religion. But how does Christianity fit into this? So I had the opportunity to work with the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews for 4.5 years. And in that time, I decided to learn about my audience. And I learned a little bit about the Gospels. And what struck me, and I read through the Gospels, what struck me was, wow, these guys were such Jews. That people here in Israel, they talk the same way about as these guys in the Gospels. They have the exact same intonations in many cases as well. If we look at Matthew 23, when there's the rebuke of the Pharisees that Jesus is giving, that is the most Jewish diatribe I've ever seen in my life. It's harsh and it's intense and it's talking about essentially it goes so far as to call them a brood of vipers, and that is exactly the kind of rhetoric that we both heard in ancient times during the times of the Talmud, during the times of the Mishnah, and the things that we hear today in Israel. My friends of mine here in Israel have the same sort of language and ability to rebuke the elders of Israel and the way that the country is being run by the government, the way that rabbinical system is set up here in Israel. That constant sort of conflict and discussion is very, very Middle Eastern and extremely Jewish because our whole religion is enumerated by debate. So what I want to tell you guys about here is I'm going to draw out sources from the Talmud and the Mishnah, And I believe that all Christians, after learning so much about Christians, should learn about the Talmud and the Mishnah. A quick way that I illustrate this is that in Acts 22, Paul is speaking before the people of Jerusalem, and he switches over to Aramaic. And then suddenly all the people are quieted down, like, wait a second, we understand what this guy is saying. Now we can understand you. Before you were speaking Greek or something like that, we're not going to hear that stuff. But you suddenly start speaking in Aramaic. Now I understand what you're saying. And the Talmud is also is all written in Aramaic. That debate essentially between scholars that happened 2,000 years ago, our oral tradition that was written down and put into writing in order to be studied by the generations since. And there he also mentions, Paul, that his teacher is Gamliel, is the sage Gamliel of the time. We're very familiar with a number of Gamliels within the Talmud who are commentators on various Jewish practices and parts of the Mosaic tradition that need to be enumerated for us. Because when we received the Bible at Sinai, there isn't exactly a instruction hand manual to go along with it. There's no written manual to go along with it, but rather we as the Jewish people believe that there is an oral tradition that goes hand in hand with the written tradition. And one of the ways I illustrate this is we have something like the Sabbath, and it says keep the Sabbath and don't do malacha. Well, what exactly does that mean? How do we really know what to do, what not to do? When do we know that we're treading on our own toes here and we're not committed to the letter of the law? And so in the oral tradition, which is a tradition that is given from father to son, father to son, father to son, gives us all of that information, gives us that resource essentially that we can draw upon. And people ask me, well, maybe God should have written that down. Maybe He should have given it to us in a written form, so there's not so much debate about it today. And the best counter argument that I found so far for this is that the reason that it's an oral tradition that is developed in the Jewish practices and texts is that it is meant to evolve. It's meant to evolve with our culture, with our speaking. It's essentially meant to evolve into this debate that we see today of two major extremes that are being debated by either side, because two things can be true at once. Two great values can be held and still conflict with one another, especially when it comes to the practicing of the law for the sake of the Lord. And so too, I recommend that Christians look into this as a resource. I mean, you can read the Bible again and again and again and still get something new out of it each time. But I do recommend going to this resource and learning about the Mishnah and the Talmud, because you'll recognize a lot of the names perhaps that are mentioned in the Gospels as well, and a lot of the way that the Jewish practices are set up to this day. So with that being said, I'm going to get to the subject at hand, which is Hanukkah. And Hanukkah, we know the story of Hanukkah. We've had it broken down here, so I'm not going to go so deep into it right now. But essentially, we're talking about a jug of oil that is found after the great destruction of the Greeks in the temple, and it's sitting over there on the side. And my question, the very Jewish question to ask questions at this point, is where did we source that oil from? So allow me to quickly share my screen here. I apologize for my tabs. I'm going to close them over here. Here we go. I'm going to source right now from Deuteronomy 33, and we're going to look at here at verse 24. And of Asher, he said, most blessed be the sons of Asher, be Asher. May he be the favorite of his brothers. May he dip his foot in oil. Okay, we know that Asher has got some olive oil going on. He's got a lot of olive oil in his region. And there is a tradition as well that the olive oil was sourced from Asher specifically because of their very, very northern, where did my map go? Here, because of their very, very northern northern residency, I would say, or northern occupancy of the land of Israel. They're as far away from Judah and Jerusalem as you could possibly be, essentially, on the northernmost tip. So one of the traditions is that the oil was specifically sourced from there, being a very, very high quality oil, in order to be used in the temple services. Because if you look at the story of Hanukkah, okay, so you found a jug of oil, but right behind the right behind the uh, right behind the Temple Mount over here, where the menorah was standing. This is where the temple was standing at that time. It was destroyed. That was ransacked by the Greeks, and an idol was placed there as well. You could have just gone to these olive trees right over here, an ancient olive grove that definitely existed at that time because we read about it in the Gospels of Gethsemane. Ancient olive trees, very excellent olive oil that's there. So there's a couple of reasons why they might not have sourced the oil from the specific location. It could be that A, the Greeks actually destroyed the olive trees knowing that they would want to be used in the service of the temple and destroyed also olive resources. The other option is that the value of the traditions within the Jewish people at that time was so much so that they would even wait during this time the 8-day journey that it would take to go all the way north to collect the oil from the tribe of Asher and then bring it all the way south to be used in the temple service. That tradition was just so powerful among the nation that they didn't want to give it up. Um, and so we can see that that's why the miracle was lasting for 8 days specifically at that time. I want to point out also that the December time period, the time in which Hanukkah happened, we're celebrating, happens around the time of the olive harvest. It's just after the olive harvest in November. So here in Israel, you're going to be able to see a lot of olive oil available, unless, of course, the Greeks destroyed it. So we see essentially a debate that comes up about this oil, about where it's sourced. We see how meticulous the Jewish people were in the sourcing of this oil specifically. And I want to get into a little bit of that debate that we have actually in the Talmud, in Shabbat. In Shabbat, this is one of the Talmudic tracts of 22. We have a big fight between two sages or two houses, the house of Shammai and the house of Hillel. And they're really debating.
Abe,
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Can I interrupt just for a second? You pointed out
Yeah.
to Gethsemane over there, but Gethsemane is actually a translation of the word Gat Shmanim, which is an oil press. And so it's very important to clarify that there was oil there, right there by the Temple Mount.
Right here. These are olive trees right here. These are actually very ancient olive trees that are hundreds and hundreds of years old. And the way that you work in olive trees, you graft on a new branch to the old branches, and it is also a very beautiful symbol for the connection between Christians and Jews. That essentially the root cannot survive without the grafting of the branch, and the branch cannot survive without the root. And this is mentioned also by Paul in his writings. Thank you so much. So I'm jumping here into Shabbat. And this is strictly from the Talmud. And I'm bringing up Hillel and Shammai specifically in their debate about this because Jesus traditionally was from the house of Hillel. He would have been part of a house which they essentially believed more in the use of the law in a communal setting, in a communal way, rather than keeping the law just for the sake of keeping the law. I'd say that there's perhaps a reflection of that in the Gospels of the Pharisees being much more intense about the keeping of each and every individual practice in order to fulfill the letter of the law, as opposed to the meaning behind the law, the more general communal meaning behind the law. So they have a disagree on the nature. So I'm going to jump in here. Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel disagree as to the nature of that adjustment. Beit Shammai said on the first day, one kindles 8 lights, and from there on gradually decreases the number of lights until on the last day of Hanukkah, he kindles 1 light. And then Beit Hillel says on the first day, one kindles 1 light, and from there on gradually increases the number of lights until the last day, he kindles 8 lights. And this is the tradition that we hold by to this day. We hold by Beit Hillel. There are two Amoraim that disagreed about this. And the reason for the opinion for Beit Shammai is that the light corresponds to the incoming days, i.e., the future. We're looking forward towards the future of what's to come. On the first day, 8 days remain in Hanukkah. One kindles 8 lights, and on the second day, 7 remain, etc., etc. The reason for Hillel's opinion is that the number of lights correspond to the outgoing days. Each day, the number of lights corresponds to the number of days Hanukkah that were already observed. And one said that the reason for Beit Shammai's opinion, the number of lights corresponds to the bowls of the festival. And the reason for Hillel's opinion is the number of lights is based on the principle one elevates to a higher level in matters of sanctity and does not downgrade. Therefore, if the objective is to have the number of lights correspond to the number of days, there's no alternative to increasing their number with the passing of each day. So what we said here essentially, it seems like we're like debating this little minuscule topic here. Well, what does it really matter? We're commemorating the 8 days of Hanukkah, and I want to stop us real quick before we say something of that gravity, because it doesn't just matter that you're keeping a tradition. It doesn't just matter that you're being mindful in keeping these traditions. It matters how you do it, and the one of the most difficult ways to illustrate that is the story of Yiftach. Yiftach or Jephthah is one of the great warriors in Jewish history, and he goes out to fight the Ammonites and comes back to his home, and he says, "Let the first thing that comes through my door." We're reading here from Judges 11. he comes back and he says, the first thing that comes from my door, the first thing that comes through my house, I shall sacrifice it to God. And his daughter happens to come through that door at that exact moment, and Yiftach is bound by his oath essentially to then sacrifice his daughter. So you've got to watch how you're celebrating. You have to be mindful of how essentially you're celebrating each of these individual lights. And we go according to Hillel because he has a sort of a moral principle that we're thinking about here is we're elevating ourselves, we're bringing ourselves up a level each night to reach that complete eight lights. We're essentially building on ourselves, understanding that we come from a place of a depth somewhere, and that we're taking this holiday and each day increasing its worth. Um, Wonderful. So we've discussed a little bit about how we celebrate miracles, the meticulousness behind miracles, and also the meaning behind that meticulousness as well. And we want to give credit to God each and every day of these miracles, that these miracles are happening to us. We want to make sure that we're not only recognizing what those miracles are, but making sure that each of them is sanctified in their own individual way. Now, this strikes me as a parallel. There's a parallel here that I think that exists between the unity of Christians and Jews today and this miracle. And the way that I see it is this: it's an incredible miracle that we're here talking to each other, but it is a collection of miracles. It's a whole bunch of miracles that had to happen one by one. My family had to retain its Judaism in the diaspora for 2,000 years, passing from father to son to father to son to father to son, maintaining the rich tradition that I was born with and I'm given to. And Christianity went through this journey, this incredible journey from the times of the Gospels and the disciples spreading to the nations, and then reaching all of the nations of the world, and then finally coming back home to the land of Israel and to the Jewish people. That is such a huge miracle that I see Christians that are involved in so many organizations today in the land of Israel, that I see Christians all over the streets here in Israel, usually when there's travel going on. I see so many pro-Christian people around the world who are speaking about the importance of their spiritual homeland of Israel. And I want to take a moment during this Hanukkah experience to not just point out those collective of miracles, and so we're sitting here today, but rather focus on each individual miracle that brought us to this point. And this is important because it is how we give credit to God that also counts. It's how we essentially give our gratitude and show our gratitude to God that counts on every single one of these miracles. Um, so do we view ourselves as one of those individual separate lights that we're lighting each night? That wow, it's incredible that the nation of Israel was created, and then the next day, the next light, it's amazing that the Christian nations are coming to the aid of Israel in this time, and it's incredible that Israel has won its wars against its enemies, against all costs. And then we see the collective light of all eight of those lights shining brightly. I want to give a finishing piece here as well about this. I'm gonna make sure I got everything here. I want to also just show you real quick. I had a picture open that I want to show you. This is where the oil was likely sourced from the lands of Asher. And I was told this by one of the locals, so I don't necessarily believe this is true, but it's a little area called Kedita in the north of Israel, just south of Tzfat, and it's very well known for a squatter community that has illegal housing that they've put up there to avoid paying taxes. But that doesn't necessarily discredit their claim, because they have a very rich olive grove source that it's at the base of the Tzfat mountains there. I just wanted to show you that real quick. So I want to leave you with a thought after speaking about those individual miracles and also giving credit to God in the right way using that illustration of the Hanukkah menorah. I want to also leave you with a thought about what those miracles truly were. So, okay, we found a jug of oil, right? The Jews found a jug of oil, and they realized it would only last for one day. And what did they do? They didn't light a little bit of the candle for part of the day. They didn't light the candle for just one full day and, figured that would be it. They put the full, they've lit all eight, they lit all seven of the candelabras for the menorah, with the understanding that they would run out of oil after this day. They wanted to have the miracle for just that one day. Or perhaps they even knew that perhaps a miracle would occur if they placed their faith in God in the right way. And the real miracle of this essentially is the courage of the Maccabees at that time, that amidst all this destruction coming into their temple, I can't imagine what they would have thought, seeing an idol disgracing the temple and seeing that there's only one jug left over to perform this incredible service of lighting the menorah. and they come up to the menorah and they decide, you know what, we're going to do it. And that courage is part of that miracle as well. It's the courage that all of us have to be a part of that menorah, to be a part of those lights that are illuminating the world together as Christians and Jews. It's that we have the courage essentially to go do it, even if it doesn't seem like it's going to work, even if it seems that all the odds are against us, even if it seems that there's destruction all around us. This is the thing that we're committed to doing, and that is the true miracle right there. We wanted to open an opportunity to give questions, and I kept myself on time. Another miracle.
Good. Thanks a lot, Abe. I think what you're really talking about is the courage is really faith. It's trusting in God, and that's the first step of, you know, not believing in something that you see, but believing in something that is you know, passionate. It's in your heart. It's the Lord guiding you. So yes, that I agree with. That's a miracle. I do want to say this though. You know, you're talking about debate, and I know that it's kind of a common thing for the Jews to debate in theology or for the Torah, and in a way that is, you know, what I consider passion, and the passion of a person's perspective or a facet of understanding. Maybe another person doesn't have quite that understanding yet, but coming together, we sharpen and we're able to illuminate for each other if we'll just listen and not be so headstrong. So I think that debate is more of a passion. We just need to open up and allow others to. We need to be teachable. We need to have faith. We need to have that courage that you're talking about. And one of the things I based that on is in Daniel chapter 12, starting at verse 8. And just to read this, it says, "But I heard," this is after he saw the vision. He goes, "I heard and I understood not. Then I said, Lord, what shall be the end of these things?" And he says, "Go your way." The angel says, "Go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed until the time of the end, until Akrit Hayamim," which I believe that we are entering in, or if not already in. And then it says, "Many will be purified, made white, and the wicked would do wickedly. And but it says, none of the wicked will understand, but the wise shall understand." So it really proves your point that we evolve. So there is an evolution, I think, of understanding and revelation as the word is being revealed in time, and at the right time when the stars line up and the luminaries line up, like Susanna was saying. So bravo, brilliant teaching. Thank you. Gidon, you have a comment or a question?
Yes, I'm very grateful to my friend Abe, who spoke about the Talmud and the Mishnah. I often like to say that Christians are often hesitant about the Talmud. They sometimes have heard incorrectly that that's an evil book or something like that. But really, Christians really owe their divine lives, their lives of faith, to the Talmud. Let me explain why. Because how many people know about the amazing book that was written about Japanese basket weaving? Not too many people, because it's not a very interesting book. But a book that is very exciting and very interesting, then people will talk about that book. Maybe they'll make a movie about that book. Maybe they'll write other books about that book. So the fact that the Jewish people discussed the Bible so much in the time of the Bible itself, in the time of the Maccabees, in the time of the First Temple period, and what ultimately became the Mishnah and the Talmud, that shows how much the Jewish people loved the Bible. Had they not loved the Bible so much, that would have been proven by them not creating the Talmud. So if you look at it the other way, if there would be no Talmud, there really would be no Bible, because it would have been forgotten. So Christians, I think, should be grateful for the Jewish people, and I hear this a lot, grateful for the Jewish people who have kept the Jewish Bible, have kept the Old Testament, have kept the Tanakh. But even more so, they have to recognize, thank you for loving the Bible so much that you created an entire encyclopedic book called the Talmud that just proves how much you love it. And if I can give another ping for the Talmud, today I have a few Christian friends who are studying the Talmud. It's in many cases, in most cases, it's a very difficult book to follow, but sometimes you come up with things that are just fascinating and add to your spiritual life as well. So I'm just giving a little plug for the Talmud here myself as well. Thank you very much, Abe.
Yeah, and by having grown up in Israel for the last 20 years, the Talmudic sort of nature of the debate, one of the ones that stands out to me the most, that illustrates the intensity of the Talmud, is a debate over the kashrut, or the whether an oven is kosher or not. And is to summarize the debate, essentially, one of the rabbis literally invokes the power of God to prove his point, and he is then excommunicated from the community because you're not supposed to invoke the name of God in order to prove your point in the oral tradition debates. And that sort of intensity of excommunicating someone from the community is it's essentially the backdrop of which you see the Gospels happening on. That's exactly what's happening at that time. Is this sort of division of communities that's happening at that point, and the debates that are happening within those communities between Jewish people. And that's exactly what the gospel should be seen as. Should be seen as. It's the way I saw them as well the second I opened the book.
Amazing. We'll talk about that later, I'm sure. I'd like to move forward if I can, because we're already a minute later. Oh my goodness. I'd like to introduce my good friend Robert Blinkney, PhD. He's an associate professor at the Hebraic Christian College and the author of Evangelical Interpretation After Auschwitz, Planting Seeds for Responsible Deeds. Robert earned a PhD in religion and social ethics from the University of Southern California. And in addition, he previously studied at Drew University, Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary, and Boston University School of Theology, including at the latter under Professor Elie Wiesel. Robert Blinkney and his wife Tiggy live in Worcester, Massachusetts, and today, Dr. Blinkney will speak on the topic of Hanukkah lights for a nightly world. Bivakasha, Dr. Blinkney. Please unmute yourself and take the stand.
Thank you, Gidon and Victoria. Thank you, all of you. Thank you kindly for including me in this symposium. And as Gidon said, my subject, Hanukkah and lights for a nightly world. And I've got do I do share screen to, how do I attach a PowerPoint? I'm sorry, I can't hear you. You're muted.
I'm sorry, you have to just click share screen and then find the screen that you like. Usually it's best to simply share everything on the screen and then find your PowerPoint and share it like that.
I'm sorry.
It's at the bottom. There's a
I found share screen.
Click on that and whatever is opened on your computer should be available.
Oh, okay. I'm just sorry I'm not tech savvy. Okay.
All is forgiven, my child.
Okay. I think that works. Can you see that?
Yes.
Good. Okay.
You might want to select on the bottom where way in the bottom next to where it says 111, you see the screen. So if you click that little tiny icon, that will turn it into a actual presentation and not how you're editing it now.
Say again? How do I do it?
On the also on the top where you see view, if you slideshow, just click slideshow. Yes.
Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. Years ago, when I taught at a local college, one of my students said to me, Hanukkah is only for Jews. I answered him, the menorah was given only to the Jewish people, but the light of the menorah has been given to all the world. As I'm sure my student, as I'm sure my student knew well, the origins of Hanukkah are distinctively Jewish. Long ago, powerful fanatical zealots for Greek culture tried to violently force Jews to surrender their covenant and Torah. Refusing to abandon their heritage, the Maccabees rededicated their temple, which had been desecrated. When they did so, they had a little bit of oil, enough to light the menorah in the temple for only one day. And yet Providence came to their aid, since this was somehow enough to provide all the light the menorah needed for 8 days. Oh boy, sorry. I'm having technical issues. I'm just going to skip the slides. I'm sorry. Surely we need light in our lives today. As Elie Wiesel's Night warns us, living in a time of great spiritual and moral darkness can have monstrous consequences, bringing enormous suffering to many. Is it too much to hope that through the flickering lights of the menorah, the creator of the universe, the shield of Abraham, continues to speak to us as if to say, I'm still here. For the repair of the world, surely people of every nation need light from above. Today, I have 2 Hanukkah stories to share with you. One of them, a condensed version of a story by Elie Wiesel, and the other about a Japanese diplomat named Chiune Sugihara. And then I have 3 questions for your consideration. First, a Hanukkah story. Oh, what's that? Okay. First,
just tell me who we are, and I will share it for you.
Okay, very good. Thank you. First, a Hanukkah story passed down from my late professor, Elie Wiesel, around number 10. By early December 1944, snow covered the graveyard of Auschwitz, and its slave laborers were starving, emaciated, and tormented by freezing cold winds, with many dying from cold and hunger. So preoccupied were prisoners with getting warm clothing that many would even sell crumbs of bread to get rags to cover themselves from the chill. Everyone, that is, except Wiesel's bunkmate. Once the head of a yeshiva in a small Polish town, he clearly had other things on his mind. At first, Wiesel assumed that the man was focused, like everyone else, on getting a warmer coat or even a scarf. No, he was looking for something else: potatoes and oil. Specifically, he was looking for 8 whole potatoes and oil. There we go, right there. Or if it wasn't possible to get 8 potatoes, then 4 of them, since they could be cut in half to kindle 8 Hanukkah lights. The young Wiesel was astonished. How could his bunkmate even think of trying such a crazy, dangerous thing in Auschwitz? But the man replied that one mustn't leave a mitzvah unfulfilled, especially in Auschwitz. He explained, once we neglect observing one, even a small one, there will soon be a second, even bigger one. So don't even start. Like generations of Jews before him, Wiesel's bunkmate honored the courage of Judah Maccabee, who would die rather than betray the Torah. And so this bunkmate resolved never to abandon those teachings, saying that it was even more important to continue them in Auschwitz, to kindle the Jewish people's flames of faith. Despite pleas from Wiesel and later others that there was no need for his bunkmate to risk his life to light Hanukkah candles, the man remained determined, declaring that he did not expect any of the prisoners of Auschwitz to live. He asked, if we're going to die anyway, why not die for a mitzvah and not just because the murderer wants us to? Despite his bunkmate's resolve, Wiesel reports, he was unable to acquire either 8 or 4 whole potatoes. But then another prisoner talked with a kitchen worker who was observant. And then this prisoner brought Wiesel's bunkmate not only 2 raw potatoes, but also a little bit of oil. The 2 potatoes were carefully divided into 8 portions. And so Wiesel's block of prisoners was able to light the first Hanukkah candle. Before long, prisoners from other blocks had heard of this heroic candle lighting, and so many gathered, wondering at this blessed sight while listening to Wiesel's bunkmate sing a traditional Hanukkah song. Evenings passed, and more candles were lit. When it came time to light the 8th candle, the entire block gathered, joining in the prayers and singing traditional melodies. Long after the lights of these candles had been extinguished, Wiesel recalls, their warmth persisted in the memories of all who saw them. For Wiesel and surely also others, this memory of courage and light gave life-giving strength in a dark time. In Wiesel's words, if Jews had the fortitude to believe in victory over the Greeks, then we could not now surrender our trust in defeating our enemy. In January 1945, the Germans evacuated Auschwitz, forcing prisoners to undertake a long death march in the extreme cold. Since he lost sight of his bunkmate then, Wiesel never learned if the man survived the ordeal. Decades later, Wiesel reflected, year in, year out, when the world is celebrating Hanukkah, I remember him. Was this experience of the power of the Hanukkah lights like the miracle of the oil in Judah Maccabee's time? In any case, Wiesel had witnessed it firsthand. My second story is about Chiune Sugihara. Shortly before Hanukkah, in December 1939, an 11-year-old Jewish boy in Lithuania named Soli Ganor had a small difficulty. He had been given some money as a Hanukkah present and then donated it to help Jewish refugees who had fled Nazi murderers after Hitler's invasion of Poland a few months before. Afterward, Soli wanted to buy a ticket to see a Laurel and Hardy movie, but having donated his money, he was penniless. Hoping that his aunt might help him out, Soli went to her nearby shop. There she was, speaking to an elegant formally dressed gentleman, the newly arrived consul general from Japan. Solly's aunt introduced the boy to His Excellency, who gave the boy a friendly smile. Although she agreed to give her nephew some money, the consul general, Sugihara, offered the boy some of his own money, saying that he would be Solly's uncle for the holiday. Surprised, Solly took the money and thanked the kind gentleman. And then he added, "If you're my uncle, why don't you come to our Hanukkah party on Saturday?" The diplomat said that he'd never been to a Hanukkah party before. And so Solly's aunt said, "If you'd like to come, please do." Later, Solly's father said, "You did the right thing. You should invite strangers to our holidays." About 30 people were there with many relatives. And when Solly's aunt walked in with Sugihara and his wife, they were given a warm welcome. All the relatives and guests sang Hanukkah songs, and Leah Rosenblatt, a Jewish girl who had escaped Poland, lit the candles of the menorah with Solly. Solly's father introduced Leah Rosenblatt and her father as having recently escaped from Poland, and had invited her father, Mr. Rosenblatt, to say a few words. The refugee spoke of the killing of his wife, 2 of his children, and many other Polish Jews, and then broke down crying. Sugihara listened carefully to this sad account, looking troubled. Certain that Nazi Germany would invade Lithuania next, Rosenblatt begged Sugihara to provide him with a visa to travel to Japan. Shaking his head, the diplomat regrettably explained that Japan was not issuing such visas, not even transit visas. Still, Sugihara invited Rosenblatt to see him at the consulate just in case he might help. In the months that followed, Sugihara came to know more and more Jewish families, and many came to feel that if they had any possibility of leaving Lithuania before Nazis arrived, his help would be essential. By June 1940, Sugihara learned that the Dutch Caribbean islands would grant refugees end visas, and that the Soviet Union would allow those departing Lithuania for these islands to travel through Soviet territory. Even so, the Japanese government forbade Sugihara from issuing transit visas to Jewish refugees. Sugihara reflected, "I could not allow these people to die, people who had come to me with death staring them in their eyes." He saw the refugees face to face, begging with tears in their eyes, so desperate that they went to kiss his shoes. Sugihara decided to disobey his government and issue thousands of visas to refugees, saying, "There is nothing wrong in saving many people's lives." Mrs. Sugihara explained, "My husband and I are Christians of the Greek Church, so we desired earnestly to help the Jews." With help from a Jewish student, Sugihara began stamping transit visas and other documents. As a result, 3,500 transit visas were given to refugees, and thousands of Jewish lives were saved. Here are 3 questions to invite further reflection on Hanukkah. Number 1, Eloisel's bunkmate hoped that his example of lighting candles in Auschwitz would kindle the Jewish people's flames of faith. If you were talking with someone who suffered from despair, how might the lights of Hanukkah, that shone even in Auschwitz, tend to rekindle a turning from despair to hope? Number 2, the Bible tells us in Exodus 20, verse 18, that all the people of Israel at Sinai somehow saw the sounds of thunder. They saw sounds. And it tells us in Zechariah 8:23 that 10 men from varied nations and languages will say to a Jew, "Let us go with you, for we have heard that God is with you." Might these verses be related? If Israelites could see the sounds at Sinai, couldn't a non-Jew like Sugihara also hear divine light through the Hanukkah menorah? That is, couldn't he, and might not also we, hear through this light the voice of the same Creator who said, "Let there be light," and who later said to Avram, "Fear not, I am your shield." Number 3, if the light of the menorah is for all the world, and if celebrating that light helped Sugihara hear the divine voice, resist darkness, and act justly, how might this same light similarly illuminate non-Jews, including Christians, for today's challenges?
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Bleakney. I'm very taken by your profound stories, your profound testimonies. The story of the potatoes, it reminds me of Elijah and his confrontation with the prophets of Baal. It was a time of drought, and there was very little water, yet he saturated the sacrifice with water. And just as these people in Auschwitz who sacrificed potatoes when they were starving, it was really an act of faith, like you said, an act of courage, going back to that understanding of trusting God, and believing that the sacrifice would also cause something good to happen. And we know that we've learned a lot of lessons from Auschwitz, from the Holocaust. This is a wonderful story that teaches faith and trust, as well as the sacrifice of the Japanese diplomat who sacrificed possibly his job, his career. Who knows? But he put a lot on the line because he did what was right and spreading the light. So thank you for these wonderful testimonies, these teachings that we can definitely apply to Hanukkah and to our lives in general. Gidon?
Thank you very, very much. I'm glad that we were able to partner, Dr. Bleakney, with your presentation. Managed to do that on the last moment. And I'd also like to point out here that I speak from time to time with my friend Robert through Zoom personally, and I'd like to take this also an opportunity for a plug to have anybody who's watching this video to reach out to me. And if they'd like to have a one-on-one with me also, you can reach out to me, and I'll be very happy to schedule that, as I do with my good friend, Dr. Bleakney, from time to time. Thank you very much. And I think, Victoria, you are introducing the next speaker.
I'm going to try to read this tiny little print. This is Dr. Phaedra Shapiro that is going to be speaking to us, and she is a senior research fellow at the Philos Project, directs the Israel Center for Jewish-Christian Relations, and also is a research fellow at Tel Hai College. She spends a great deal of time reading and writing books and articles about Jews and Christians and the challenges and possibilities for building a better engagement between us. Dr. Shapiro is a mom of 6. Me too. Welcome to the Mom Club, right? and lives in the Galilee. She freely admits to hating Hanukkah until making Aliyah 15 years ago from Canada. Can't wait to hear what you have to say, Dr. Shapira. Please take the floor.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Gidon, and to you for organizing this wonderful symposium, and to all the speakers. It's really helped me to think a whole bunch of new thoughts. I've actually been taking notes as we go, so I appreciate that. Okay, let's see if I can do this. Somewhat coincidentally, I see that David Avery has left, but I'm actually speaking to you this evening from Emmaus Nicopolis, where I have been celebrating Hanukkah and lighting Hanukkah candles with a group of monks and nuns here, so teaching about Hanukkah as well. So that's very special to be at the site of one of the famous Hanukkah battles. Okay, let's see. Okay, so I want to speak about something that that Abe mentioned, and just maybe go into a little bit more detail what we can learn from that ancient debate that Abe spoke about between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. And my question is really, can power and holiness coexist? So our first question, and I'll be speaking about some things that I'm sure lots of people already know about, but just to get us started, and a very distinctly chose a sort of Christmassy picture to go with it. That question is Hanukkah a biblical holiday? Because of course we can ask the same thing about Christmas. Well, yes and no. It depends on whose Bible we're speaking about. First of all, 1st and 2nd Maccabees, as we know, describes the events of Hanukkah, both the historical events and the miraculous stories. These books are not in the Jewish Bible. So Hanukkah is not a biblical holiday for Jews. These books are also not in Protestant Bibles. Luther, of course, thought that the Apocrypha are books that are useful and good to read, but are not considered equal to the Holy Scriptures. However, these books, 1st and 2nd Maccabees, are in Catholic and Orthodox Bibles, as they were included in the Septuagint, which serves as the basis for Catholic and Orthodox Bibles. So Hanukkah actually is a biblical holiday for Catholics and Orthodox Christians. And interestingly enough, both in the Catholic Church and in the Orthodox churches, there are feast days that celebrate the Holy Maccabee Martyrs. In the Catholic Church, that's on August 1st, I believe, and in the Orthodox tradition on August 3rd. So is Hanukkah a biblical holiday? Not quite simple thing to answer. Hanukkah, as everybody knows, does appear in the Gospel of John as a festival that brought Jesus to Jerusalem from Galilee. At that time, the festival of the dedication took place in Jerusalem. It was winter, and Jesus was walking in the temple in the portico of Solomon. So like the other feasts and festivals that Jesus participated in that we know about from the Gospels, Hanukkah would have been part of Jesus's regular ongoing Jewish life. So Hanukkah is in the Christian New Testament. So somewhat paradoxically, Hanukkah is a holiday that's not biblical for Jews and is biblical for Christians. Yet Jews celebrate Hanukkah and most Christians do not. And so I wanted to think about, what are the universal messages of Hanukkah? And I think that, the previous speakers brought out so many beautiful universal lessons for us as Jews and Christians from Hanukkah. And I want to try to bring out another one. As we know, Hanukkah celebrates two things. The first is that military victory that David Avery was speaking about, that when Judea was invaded by the Seleucid Emperor Antiochus Epiphanes IV, he outlawed fundamental Jewish practices. We know he violated the temple with a statue of Zeus and the sacrifice of impure animals on the altar. The Maccabees arose in response, and this group of Jewish guerrilla warriors undertook an uprising led by Mattathias and his 5 sons. We know that revolt was successful, and by 165 before the Common Era, the temple had been recaptured and cleaned, with a new altar dedicated, fit for sacrifices to the God of Israel. Okay, wonderful, military victory. Hanukkah also celebrates a spiritual victory because, as we know, a significant problem remains. According to Exodus chapter 27, lamps were to burn all night, every night in the temple, lit from pure consecrated olive oil. Yet only one such jar of oil could be found, enough for only one day. That single jar of oil lasted for 8 days, the length of time that it took to bring more pure oil to Jerusalem. The spiritual victory is truly that of the people not waiting until there was enough oil to light the temple menorah, but lighting it anyway in faith and in trust. So I want to dip into the source that Abe brought out from the Talmud about the debate between Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel, and how we light Hanukkah candles, and relate it to this issue of the two victories, the military victory and the spiritual victory of Hanukkah, and why it is that we choose to light in a particular way. As everybody knows, we light Hanukkah candles with one more light every night, so that on the 8th night, we have a blazing kind of glory of eight lights. But there's no kind of, it's not obvious that that's the right way to do things. So the Talmud recounts this debate. Beit Shammai says, on the first day, one kindles 8 lights, and from there on, gradually decreases the number of lights until on the last day of Hanukkah, they kindle 1 light. And Beit Hillel says, on the first day, one kindles 1 light, and from there on, gradually increases the number of lights until on the last day, they kindle 8 lights. We light, of course, according to Beit Hillel, just so that you can see what this would look like, how Hillel lights the Hanukkah candles, the way that we're familiar with. First night, 1 candle, last night, 8 candles. Here's how it would look if we're to light according to Beit Shammai. The first night, 8 candles, gradually decreasing in number. Every night, 1 less, until on the final night, there would be only 1 light. What was Shammai thinking, right? Where does he get this crazy idea from? It seems ridiculous to us. According to this source in the Talmud, the reason for Beit Shammai's opinion is that the number of lights corresponds to the bulls of the festival of Sukkot. So now this is all like really kind of crazy sounding. Hanukkah, Sukkot, what? You know, what do they have to do with each other? Why Sukkot? So first of all, in 2nd Maccabees, the connection between Hanukkah and Sukkot is made very explicit. It happened that on the same day on which the sanctuary had been profaned by the foreigners, the purification of the sanctuary took place. That is, on the 25th day of the same month, which was Kislev. They celebrated it for 8 days with rejoicing in the manner of the festival of booths, remembering how not long before, during the festival of booths, they had been wandering in the mountains and caves like wild animals. Therefore, carrying ivy-wreathed wands and beautiful branches and also palm fronds, they offered hymns of thanksgiving to him who had given success to the purifying of his own holy place. But we have other connections that are very obvious, I think, to people who know their Bible well, between Hanukkah and Sukkot. We know that the dedication of the first temple and of the second temple happened at Sukkot. So if we look at 1 Kings chapter 8, verses 1 through 4, talking about the dedication of the first temple. And as you see, then Solomon assembled the elders of Israel and all the heads of the tribes, the leaders of the ancestral houses of the Israelites, before King Solomon in Jerusalem, to bring up the ark of the covenant of the Lord out of the city of David, which is Zion. All the people of Israel assembled to King Solomon at the Feast of Booths. So the first temple is dedicated during the season of Sukkot. So we have a connection between dedications and Sukkot, but also we see in Ezra chapter 3, verses 1 through 4, that the second temple is also dedicated at this time. Just looking, verse 3, they set up the altar on its foundation because they were in dread of the people of the land, and they offered burnt offerings upon it to the Lord morning and evening. And they kept the festival of booths as prescribed and offered the daily burnt offerings by number according to the ordinance as required for each day. So there's a very strong connection between Hanukkah and Sukkot. And it's this that Beit Shammai is drawing on as a model for how we ought to be lighting Hanukkah lights. So why these declining numbers? Well, if we looked at what the Bible, what the Tanakh requires as Sukkot offerings, if we look at the bulls, you can see that the offerings decrease in number each day. So that on day 1, according to the book of Numbers, on day 1, 13 bulls are offered. On day 2, 12 bulls. On day 3, 11 bulls, all the way down to 7 bulls on the 7th day. So the sacrifices of Sukkot decrease in number. And that is where Shammai gets this idea that we decrease the number of Hanukkah candles each night to be in accordance with the sacrifices of the holiday of Sukkot. Okay, so what's Beit Hillel's rationale? Beit Hillel's rationale is completely different. Why should we be adding a light every night, going from 1 up to 8? Beit Hillel says one elevates to a higher level in matters of holiness, and one does not downgrade. Why do we follow Beit Hillel? I mean, we don't actually know. We usually do anyway, but I think the real difference here is in the modes of thinking. Beit Shammai's argument was one based on a model, as we saw, that sought to fill in the sacrifices that were missed during the war. So Beit Shammai's orientation is one backward in time to the historical event of the military victory. But the argument of Beit Hillel was based on a completely different way of seeing, an orientation not backward to the historical event of military conquest, as was Beit Shammai, but rather towards something that is not caught in history, towards something extra-historical, supra-historical. His orientation is toward this thing called holiness. And I think we can learn something really very important, and especially important for the times that we are in right now from it. First of all, we're reminded that history is important. However, Beit Shammai is focused on the defeat of the enemy, which is absolutely something to celebrate. However, historical events, even very positive ones, are caught up in historical forces, and with time, their impact can diminish and become less obviously positive as we see more about the impact and ongoing historical events. And in fact, the victory of the Maccabees is a case in point. While the Maccabees make for an exciting story, and while that victory, sorry, we're hearing jets overhead, that victory was tremendously important for freedom of Jewish practice, its impact did indeed diminish over time, because ultimately the Maccabees, we ended up with the reign of some of the most corrupt and power-hungry rulers in the form of the Hasmonean dynasty, whose infighting and ambition, in fact, is what invited Rome in to rule Judea from the year 63 as a protectorate. Okay, so history, what looks like a victory, what looks like an unabashedly positive thing at one time, it's not always clear as time goes on that it is quite so obviously and eternally good. Why is this slide here? Okay, we'll just skip that slide. Holiness, on the other hand, Beit Hillel's orientation, holiness is something not caught in history. First of all, it is, by definition, an eternal good. It is always good. It is also always a future orientation, something that we grow in. Holiness is what the human person is built for, being made in the image of God. Remember that in Leviticus chapter 19, you shall be holy, for I, your God, am holy. To be created in the image and likeness of God is we are striving to increase in our holiness, to become closer and closer to that godliness, to that holiness, that pure holiness that God has. And holiness is something that we must participate in and cooperate with, do our part with in every age. So it's not something that is caught in history the way that a military victory is. So I think that the lesson that we can take from this is that power, unless it is guided by holiness, power corrupts. Human power cannot stand on its own, but must be subservient to, must be oriented to, must be guided by holiness and under the reign of God. So fine, Beit Hillel, we understand that we light in a way that increases in holiness, and we as people, as Jews and Christians, as people of faith, we are ourselves to increase in holiness. But the big question is how? And of course, that is especially challenging at a time now where there is so much darkness, so much fear, so much trauma. And it's very tempting, I think, to seek to increase in holiness. No, I think it's very tempting to seek to fix those problems, to address that darkness and that fear and that trauma solely with power. And again, to remember that power needs to be guided by holiness. So what are we as people, what are we supposed to do? And so I come back to this quotation from Rav Kook. He was the first Ashkenazi chief rabbi of British Mandate Palestine, lived from 1865 to 1935. And this quotation, in fact, is something that I find myself reading back to myself every day since October 7th to remind myself that the options are not power and powerlessness. The options are increasing in holiness. So in Arpilei Torah, Rav Kook wrote, "The purely righteous do not complain of the dark, but increase the light. They do not complain of evil, but increase justice. They do not complain of heresy, but increase faith. And they do not complain of ignorance, but increase wisdom." So I hope that this might serve also as a path, as a way for you as a person of faith, for all of us, to participate in that increasing in holiness, increasing in light, as we do at Hanukkah, particularly at a time when that darkness can feel so incredibly crushing, that it's not just power, it's power with an orientation toward holiness, and that power is actually in our hands. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Shapiro. I'm fascinated, actually, about how all of the teachings today have been dovetailing and have been integrating together to create this one picture, this one tapestry. You guys are just working beautifully. It's almost like, okay, you're handing the baton to the next person, and it's really enlightening for us to see all this coming together. And the dichotomy of what you just spoke about and what Abe spoke about earlier, about the different houses of teaching with Shammai and Hillel, the dichotomy really of the Christians not observing Hanukkah, but being in the New Testament, Jews observing it, but not being in the Torah. But then again, you mentioned how Ezra maybe alluded and illuminated, at least to Shammai, this connection. And so I think a lot of things are hidden. like Rabbi Dr. Susanna said, there's a cloaking or a concealing as well as a revealing involved in this, in light. And so I really see this beautiful connectiveness, a cohesiveness working together, even as the lights are diminished. I see, especially in light of what happened on October 7th, how one not only enters into joy with the Jewish people, but we also enter into mourning. And so as Elijah sacrificed water, as the two men in Auschwitz sacrificed the potatoes, as one sacrifices their career, a diminishing is really a sign of connecting to the mourning. And I actually saw something that I've never seen before, this other side of the coin, this other facet of Revelation. So thank you for your presentation. Beautiful.
Thank you. Well, if I may comment on the last slide about Rabbi Cook, and I'm very appreciative, Phaedra, for your bringing in Rabbi Cook. One of his most famous comments is one of his most famous phrases. And Rav Kook is known as Baal HaOrot, the master of lights. And most of his books that were published, he was an erudite scholar for certainly, and a great writer. And his different books were all different kinds of lights. And so really Hanukkah is a very important holiday for him because it is the festival of lights. And this connection that you, in your presentation about the dichotomy or the assumed dichotomy between power and holiness, is that which Rabbi Cook, after thousands of years of Jewish exile, when we saw we must be powerless in exile. We are powerless in exile, so we therefore must focus on our holiness. When the Zionist movement came and said, okay, I've had enough of this powerlessness, let's now incorporate and really strive towards power and let holiness land by the wayside. Rabbi Cook said, no, that powerfulness, that power, and that holiness must come together, just like it did in the beginning of the Hasmonean dynasty and in the holiday of Hanukkah. And ultimately, we religious Zionists, those who recognize that the Jewish people are coming back to their land and they are establishing a robust state here, it is not in spite of God, but it is because of God. And we must continue to try to aim and to strive towards that holiness and that power altogether. So thank you very much, Phaedra, for those beautiful words and that beautiful presentation. And I believe that we are up to our last speaker tonight. So I will, it is my turn to introduce. If you haven't noticed, Victoria is introducing the Jewish speakers and I'm introducing the Christian speakers. So that's another connection that we have here tonight.
You just muted yourself.
Sorry. Dr. John Degar is the founder and president of Hebraic Christian Global Community, which is an international, trans-denominational, multi-ethnic networking organization that serves as an educational and publishing resource to the entire Christian church. Dr. Gar is an academician with a pastor's heart, and he contextualizes biblical truths in terms that laypersons can understand. He challenges believers to a biblically sound, Christocentric faith that is grounded in the Hebraic heritage of Jesus and the apostles. And tonight, he is going to be addressing what I think is a fascinating topic of how Jesus celebrated Hanukkah. Dr. Gar, please take the stage.
Well, thank you, Gidon, and thank you to Dr. Victoria for your putting together this symposium. And I have been very much enriched by every person who has presented already here. And these messages have certainly dovetailed. Hanukkah has a massive amount of insight and understanding for everyone, including Christians, in spite of the fact that we Christians have largely neglected it for all these centuries. But the truth is that, as I have a sermon that I preach occasionally that says dedication, and the title of it is Dedication Always Produces Light. And this is based on the example of the rededication of the temple and then the subsequent miracle of the light that was manifest. So if we dedicate ourselves to righteousness and to justice, then light will be produced. And then my other phrase that I use periodically is that God's light always conquers the enemy's might. So it's a very great truism that we can follow on and understand. I've been exercised to speak with you about the subject that I'm entitling Jesus and Hanukkah. Virtually all Christian theology maintains and has maintained that Jesus abolished the celebration of the Jewish festivals and instituted a new Christian liturgical calendar. But nothing could be further from the truth. Indeed, Jesus himself answered that question once and for all when he said unequivocally, and I quote, "Think not that I have come to destroy the Torah or the prophets. I have not come to destroy, but to fulfill." Then Jesus made the durability of his contention even more clear when he said, and I quote again, "Until heaven and earth pass away, not one yud or one pen stroke of the Torah text will ever disappear from the Torah until all has been fulfilled." Both of those passages are from Matthew chapter 5, verses 17 and 18. Not only did Jesus never abolish the festivals of Scripture, the ones of which, by the way, God himself said, "These are my festivals," Leviticus 23 and verses 2, he in fact practiced all of them, filling them with the abundance of his life, his death, his burial, and his resurrection. Jesus did not come to start a new religion, to replace biblical and Second Temple Judaism. Jesus was a Jew, and his religion was Judaism, and he never changed either his ethnicity or his religion. His avowed purpose on earth was to complete the faith of the Holy Scriptures, the Hebrew Scriptures, the Tanakh, which, by the way, in case you were not aware of that, the Bible of Jesus is the Tanakh, and he never once quoted from the New Testament. So he was involved with all of the faith of the Scripture, which included the biblical calendar outlined in Leviticus 23 and all of its festivals. I'll seek to demonstrate that for you very briefly. The festival of redemption, first of all. It's very clear from the Gospels that Jesus celebrated the first of the biblical festivals. From John's record, he honored Passover in each of the 3 years of his ministry. As he prepared to give his life for the sins of humanity, he even exclaimed to his disciples, "I have earnestly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer," Luke 22:15. During his last Passover celebration, Jesus took from the elements of the then current traditional Seder, or the order for Passover, and instituted a practice which would help his disciples remember both the events of the Exodus and of his death and his resurrection. In this institution, after faithfully celebrating the Seder of the Passover, he took some of the matzah from the Passover that he was celebrating and said of it, "This is my body which shall be delivered for you," Luke 22:19. Then he took of the cup of redemption, the third of the 4 cups of wine that the sages had added to the elements required for Passover observance by the Torah, and he said, "This is the cup of the New Testament in my blood, which is shed for you," Luke 22, verse 20. Finally, on the very day of Passover, Jesus was crucified, at the morning hour of prayer, and he died at the afternoon hour of prayer. Since by the time of Jesus, the Passover had come to include the days of the festival of unleavened bread, as is mentioned in Ezekiel 45, verse 21, and in Luke chapter 22, verse 1, Jesus also fulfilled this festival in his life. Christians believe that Jesus was entombed as the unleavened bread from heaven, John 6:51, who never sinned or even was found to be deceitful, 2 Corinthians 5:21. Similarly, many Christians also believe that Jesus fulfilled the festival of first fruits when on the Sunday after the Passover on which he was crucified, he became what the Apostle Paul termed the first fruits of the resurrection, 1 Corinthians 15, 20, and 23. And now the festival of the Word and Spirit. There can be no doubt that Jesus endorsed the celebration of the festival of Pentecost, Shavuot, for he commanded his disciples to wait in Jerusalem until you are clothed upon with power from on high, Luke 24:49. When they obeyed his command, they received that power, but only when the day of Pentecost, or Shavuot, had fully come, Acts 2:1. No doubt Jesus knew that it was apropos for the Holy Spirit to descend on the same day on which the Torah had been given, on Shavuot, the day of Pentecost. Then we come to ingathering, the consummation. It is also clear that Jesus was fully engaged in the commemoration of the fall festivals of the Scriptures, the high holy days of Judaism. He was deeply involved in the celebration of the Festival of Tabernacles, or ingathering, in Jerusalem, the grandest of all the events in Israel. This is also clear from the fact that he took occasion at the very apex of the festivities on the last and great day of the feast to make this proclamation: if anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as the scripture has said, rivers of living water will flow from him. John 7:37-38. Jesus made this promise as the high priest poured out on the temple altar the water libation that he had taken from the pool of Siloam. Since Jesus was obviously involved with his Jewish compatriots in the great festival, it is perfectly reasonable to assume that he was also joining them in the celebrating of the Festival of Trumpets, or Rosh Hashanah, and the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. Jesus certainly spoke of cries of awakening, like in Matthew 25:6, and the universal need for repentance, Luke 5:32 and 24:47, the themes of these two holy days. Now, some Christians might protest, and they have protested, if Jesus had no sin, what reason would he have had to participate in Yom Kippur? The answer is obvious, and would be if Jesus felt that it was essential for him to be immersed in the water by John the Baptizer in order to fulfill all righteousness, as Matthew 3:13 said, nothing would have prevented him from celebrating Yom Kippur with his Jewish family. Without a doubt, the baptism that Jesus experienced was founded on the mikveh tradition of immersions, a post-Torah custom that originated in the ceremonial ablutions of the priests in the temple and was common in Israel in Jesus' day. If Jesus could share with his countrymen in John's baptism a ceremony that was nowhere commanded in the Tanakh, and then was enjoined that practice on every Christian believer, why would Jesus not have shared in the celebration of the Day of Atonement as well? Now we come to observing the post-Torah festivals. There are two festivals that the Jewish people were celebrating in the time of Jesus that did not originate in the Torah. These were Purim and Hanukkah. From the time of Queen Esther during the Persian dynasty, the Jewish people had been instructed to observe Purim in remembrance of their victory over the ominous threat of genocide incited by the Persian Prime Minister Haman. Because he was an observant Jew, Jesus would have celebrated this great festival with his Jewish family and community. As a matter of fact, Jesus made no apologies for his Jewishness when the Canaanite woman asked him to heal her daughter, when he said, I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And since Purim was enjoined upon the Israelites in the corpus of the Tanakh, it was entirely appropriate for Jesus to observe it also. Now we come to the festival that's the subject of our symposium, Hanukkah, the festival of lights, or the festival of the dedication. There's absolutely no question about whether or not Jesus observed the festival of Hanukkah. Christian scripture makes it perfectly clear when it says, at the time of the feast of the dedication, when it was winter, Jesus was walking in the temple in the portico of Solomon, John 10:22. I find it very interesting that the only place where Hanukkah is mentioned in universal canonical scripture, the Hebrew scriptures and the apostolic scriptures, is in this passage in John's gospel. Jesus was not in Jerusalem at the time of Hanukkah incidentally, nor was he unaware of the events that Hanukkah memorialized. He was probably also celebrating the miracle of the light. Jesus would certainly have relished celebrating the victory of God's light over the enemy's might. He would also have been celebrating the victory of Judaism over one of the most deceptive challenges that it ever received when efforts were made to synchronize Judaism with Hellenism and thereby change the face of Judaism forever. Led by the Maccabees, the Jewish people of simple faith in God and his instructions in the Torah were able to overcome this insidious challenge and preserve the biblical faith. Jesus used the occasion of Hanukkah to answer the ongoing question that had been posed to him so many times. Are you the Messiah? And he did so by making one of the most profound declarations in human history when he said, I and my Father are one, John 10:30. How utterly shocking. Jesus claimed to be one, echad, with God the Father, and he claimed to be the Son of God. Knowing that the cardinal truth of the first and the greatest commandment, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is God alone, the leaders of Israel objected to Jesus' words as blasphemy. They said, you, being a man, make yourself out to be God, John 10:33. In fact, these Jewish leaders were defending the central tenet of the Torah, the unity and uniqueness of Hashem, the God of Israel. The declarations of Jesus make perfect sense in the light of the purpose of Hanukkah, however, which was to memorialize the Maccabean victory over Antiochus IV Epiphanes, the Seleucid ruler who had polluted the temple by sacrificing swine on the temple altar in homage to Zeus and proclaiming himself to be God manifest, which is the meaning of the title Epiphanes. Just as Jesus' Jewish family and community were celebrating God's victory over an evil man who claimed to be God, Jesus revealed to his disciples that he was actually the God of Israel who has become human, John 1:4 and 14. Christians understand, therefore, that Jesus was not just a man who claimed to be God. Instead, they believe that he was God who had chosen to become incarnate in order to redeem the human race from the power of sin. Hanukkah also celebrated the miracle of light that occurred during the Maccabean rededication of the temple, when a one-day supply of sanctified oil, the only supply that survived the temple desecration, burned in the menorah for 8 days. And so Christians believe that Jesus, who said, I am the light of the world, became Isaiah's light to the nations, whom the apostles believed would bring God's salvation to the ends of the earth, thereby fulfilling the divine promise to Abraham that his descendants, according to the flesh, would bless all the families of the earth, Genesis 12:3. Continuity with God's system of worship. Jesus did not come to destroy the Torah or Judaism. He came to fulfill the observance of God's instructions, the Torah, in his own life, first of all. As a matter of fact, Jesus testified, I have kept my Father's commandments, proving his love for his heavenly Father, John 15:10. So it was that Jesus and his apostles never started a new religion. They simply proclaimed a Jesus Judaism, as it were, one of the many Judaisms that made the scene of first century Jewish life so rich and interesting. Jesus celebrated not only the Torah, but also the post-Torah traditions of his people. In fact, he established a way in which all people could celebrate his life, death, burial, and resurrection, and the ascension in the Jewish festivals that included Hanukkah. Christians are at liberty to do anything that Jesus himself did. Therefore, they are free to join with their Jewish friends in celebrating Hanukkah by rededicating themselves afresh to the causes of truth and light and freedom and justice from oppression of any sort, whether it be economic, social, political, or religious. All human beings are free to worship the God of Israel, for God himself said, "My house shall be called a house of prayer for all people," Isaiah 56:7.
Dr. God, that was
sharing the rich traditions of the generous Jewish people. Christians are blessed with the opportunity of having their lives enriched by sharing with their Jewish brothers and sisters in the rich traditions of Judaism. Jesus himself said, "Salvation is from the Jews," John 4:22. Everything that is authentic in Christian faith can be traced to an idea or practice of the Jews. I like to say that for every Christian fruit that is authentic, there is a Jewish root. It has been said that without the Jewish people, Gentile Christians would likely still be engaged in the worship of idols and not even know the one and only true God. The Apostle Paul declares that if you belong to Christ, the Messiah, you are Abraham's children and heirs of the promises, Galatians 3:29. So those who are Christians should turn to the lineal descendants of Abraham to learn about the foundations of the Christian faith and to participate in the rich traditions of the Hebrew Scriptures. A great entrance into such richness is to share in the celebrations of the festivals of Judaism. And if Jesus included Hanukkah in his remembrance practices, every Christian should be honored to join with the international Jewish community in the annual celebration of Hanukkah. Jews and Christians can stand together to raise the light of the menorah as Moses instructed, so that all people may see God's truth and walk therein. Jews and Christians can stand together against all forms of tyranny, just like the Maccabees did. Christians especially can demonstrate their love and support for the international Jewish community and the nation of Israel by sharing in the richness of the root of God's family truth, the Hebrew foundations of the all true faith in God. And now by demonstrating solidarity with Israel and the Jewish community, what Christians can do. Aside from the outstanding personal and corporate benefits that Christians achieve by sharing in the festivals of Judaism, as well as other parts of Jewish tradition and experience, is that doing so can be an outward demonstration of solidarity with Israel and support for the Jewish community. What a wonderful sight it would be if during the current time of anguish and suffering of the Jewish people in Israel at the hands of terrorists of unimaginable brutality, all Christians in the world would place a Hanukkah in the front window of their house and light it systematically for 8 days during Hanukkah. It would be an in-your-face demonstration that Christians take the faith of the Lord Jesus seriously enough to raise the light unequivocally in the face of the gross darkness of anti-Semitism that the non-Jewish world is manifesting against God's chosen people. When evil is bold, we must be bolder. The Church of Jesus must stand in solidarity with the family of Jesus. By doing so, they can receive a Hanukkah blessing like no other, for God promised Abraham, "I will bless those who bless you." When we bless the Jewish people and their ancient homeland, Israel, God guarantees that we will be blessed in kind. By celebrating Hanukkah, we can figuratively walk with Jesus among his Jewish family and countrymen in Solomon's portico. Behold the wonders of the house of prayer for all people, and claim our heritage as fellow citizens with the saints in the economy of God's salvation. Baruch Hashem.
Thank you, Dr. Gar. I apologize for talking over you. I think I was missing a page from your presentation. That was excellent. Just an absolute wonderful presentation. I do have a couple of things. You established eloquently about Yeshua fulfilling or being totally, fully engaged in all of the feasts, observing them. But you also posited something that was quite enlightening, and that is it's almost like, again, back to Dr. Kokanen's, the lights, the luminaries, the planets lining up at a special set time, because it was at those set times that Yeshua was documented to be crucified, to be buried, and to be resurrected on those feast days, which is just amazing to me. It really speaks to my spirit. The giving of the Spirit on Shavuot, when the disciples received the languages and were able to tell the wonders and the testimonies of what happened and why they believed that Yeshua was the Messiah. And then, of course, he was so involved in teaching us to be prepared for the fall feast of the restoration, where we could be included in the book of life, where we must repent. He was all about teaching these concepts and precepts to his followers. Just a brilliant presentation, and I think you really put a flag down. You put a marker down that says Yeshua was Jewish. There was no doubt about it, and we are to love what he loves. And I thank you so much for your presentation today, Dr. Gar.
Well, I like to say, Dr. Victoria, that Jesus was born a Jew, he lived a Jew, he died a Jew, he resurrected a Jew, he ascended to heaven a Jew, he sits on the right hand of the Father a Jew, and when he comes back again, he'll still be a Jew. He didn't die a Jew and resurrect a Roman Catholic.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyway, we get into a whole lot of interesting things there. I was thinking also about this idea of the light. And, God created in the beginning, as Gideon said, the light. First thing he said, let there be light. And he saw the light, that it was good. That phrase in Hebrew, the light that he saw, is et haor. And so the rabbis have said, what was that light that existed 4 days before the sun, moon, and stars were created? And they say that light was the Torah, because if you take the gematria, the phrase et haor, it adds up to 613, which is the number of commandments in the Torah. So, and I think that's true, because the word existed in the beginning before all of the creation. That's the eternal Torah that existed before the creation. And by the Torah, by the words of the Torah, was how Hashem created the heavens and the earth. So it's very true that everything was created by the word of God, and it was the light that produced all of it. Everything in this universe depends on the light.
That's profound.
And that's another sermon, and I don't have time to preach that one either.
And neither do we.
Yeah, right.
I think that we've had, at least not this time. Looking forward to the next time.
Yes.
We've, as Abe earlier pointed out, we've miraculously managed to stay on time here exactly. And like I always like to say, things expand and contract to fill the time that have been allotted to them, and we've certainly allotted a perfect amount of time to everybody over here. If anybody else of the people who are still here would like to make any more comments on any of the other sessions that they've heard, any other lectures that they've heard, now is a good opportunity. If there's somebody who'd like to, yes, Dr. Kokonen?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I feel like when I was listening to all of you, and especially Phaedra, when you were speaking, that I felt very strongly that this was all about the temple. And I was thinking about it, that the temple is the central element. It's what we are really talking about, because in that temple comes together the light and the holiness, the oil and the light, everything. And then I was thinking about it. Your question was, can power coexist with holiness? And sometimes we don't have that in Christianity, but in Judaism, the physical, this world is very important, not just the world to come. And I suddenly thought about it, that how could power coexist with holiness? That this is also connected to the temple, but it's Zechariah 4, I wrote it down, 4:6. Not by might, not by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord. The word spoken to Zerubbabel, it's about building the temple. And I feel like power and holiness, that they can coexist in that temple, because it's physical work that men have to do. We have a task, we have to do the work, but it's by his spirit, and that physical and even like everyday work, it becomes holy because it's by his spirit. So that was my comment that I wanted to make.
I think it's very interesting that it's emphasized that Jesus was in Jerusalem at the temple. That again, that could be a whole nother teaching.
Absolutely.
I understand that Natan Sharansky has said that for Jewish politics, there should be remembrance of both the concerns of King David regarding power politics and also the vision of Isaiah for peace. They go together. It's not one or the other. They are both part of the heritage. I think of some Christian traditions, the Anabaptists, Mennonites, Dorothy Day of the Catholic Worker, where it may be seen as an either or. But in Judaism, there may be some, like in the Jewish peace movement, who might see it that way, but I think the general tendency is to see them as both having a important and even constructive role to play in. And there are still tough questions of what do you do in individual cases? What about the founding of the State of Israel, the bombing of the King David Hotel, where Elie Wiesel's novel Dawn raises a question about a killing of a British officer. So the tough questions, they don't go away with any particular approach, but as the IDF addresses the very tough challenges of October 7 and Gaza, to just walk away, that's not so good, and yet to have no limits on power, that's not so good either.
Thank you. Anyone else would like, maybe Phaedra or Abe, have you got something to comment?
Yeah, one more thing. I'm still here.
Yes, Dr. John.
Unfortunately for us Christians, we're educated very much in the Aristotelian logic, which says there can only be one truth, and every other thing that seems to oppose that truth has to be destroyed and eliminated. Well, in Judaism, there's an understanding that truth can be on the one hand and it can be on the other hand. That's the reason why somebody said you can't teach Torah without two hands, because it's always on the one hand and on the other hand. So anyway, you got to remember that, and we Christians can learn a great lesson from that there's a balance that can be had, that we can recognize the truth that's on this side and the truth that's on this side without trying to destroy either one. And then we have more nuanced understanding of the situations and circumstances that broadens our experience, so that we're not so narrowly structured that we have no depth to us. So right. It's important, I think, to recognize that principle of being able to hold seemingly opposite positions in dynamic tension, so that we can see the truth that's in both of them.
And that's exactly what I understand that Torah teaches us. We've mentioned a few times. We've mentioned a few times the Jewish sages of the Talmud, and that's what they were doing all the time, showing that things can be understood from both sides. And one of the most famous words in the Talmud is teku, which is an acronym for Tishbi Avo V'Taretz Kushiyot Va'ayot. That Tishbi Eliyahu, Elijah, who is the precursor to the harbinger, the announcer of the Messiah, he will come and he will finalize what is the ultimate correct answer to the questions that we still are not clear about in our day and age. And that is something that we're all looking forward to. And I think that's when we're now in the holiday of Hanukkah, which, of course, as we mentioned before, means dedication. Let us rededicate ourselves to this very important lesson of hearing the truth from all who try to share it.
Absolutely.
Tov, Dr. Sarvati, would you like to conclude today's event with I believe I started today, so you can conclude it.
All right. Well, we just appreciate every one of you. Thank you for what you have given to the body of Messiah, Yeshua, and to the Jewish community as well, that is waiting for Messiah to come. We both have an expectant hope in Messiah. We join together there, and we just thank you for sharpening, the iron with us, because we get so much from what you tell us. And I hope that you hear some of what we say too, and maybe it kind of opens up a different facet for you as well. Let's work together as we just wait for the Messiah to come. May he find us watching and waiting. Amen. God bless you all. And we bless every single one that's joined us on this webinar today. And we just pray a wonderful blessing over you for Hanukkah this season. And may illumination and revelation bless your life today. Amen.
Amen. A beautiful prayer to end up with. Toda rabah, Hanukkah Sameach, happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah.
And happy holidays to all viewers. Shalom,
Hanukkah
shalom.
Sameach.
Hello.